want to make a couple of quick comments. First, I just want to congratulate the members and leaders of our Afram Caucus for another year where the events and the programming and the activities around Black History Month just get better and better and reach more and more people across UHW. And so we're really proud and always pleased to do everything we can to support and encourage, the work that you've all led on and engineered over the recent years. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I just want to welcome on behalf of all of SEIU UHW, our guests here tonight. We're really honored to have two members of the California Assembly, one a very new member and Assembly member Bryan, one who's been around a little longer, Assembly member McCarty, and we're also honored to have our Secretary of State and a longtime leading political figure in California, Secretary Shirley Weber. It really is an honor and a privilege, and all of us at UHW are pleased that you are able to join us here tonight and spend a little bit of time. The last thing I want to say, and particularly for our guests, is here in UHW, we're obviously a labor union. We're a union of over 100,000 frontline healthcare workers, overwhelmingly hospital workers. But I also want to share with you that, we talk a lot inside of UHW about being not just a union, but a workers' organization. And by that, what we mean is an organization that recognizes the primacy and the centrality of what organized labor brings to our political life and our political process. But also we aspire to go beyond, that category and to really be an organization that acts in the common good on behalf of not just all Californians, but, Americans around the country. And so, in UHW, we're always trying to think about, what can we do not just for union members and our members, but what can we do to make things better at the policy level and the political level for Californians and people across the country. And, as many of the UHW members on this call know, is, we've been active to do things in the past, like enrolling over 20,000 people in healthcare coverage when President Obama was able to get the Affordable Care Act passed. And, we were at the heart of that effort to reach out and bring healthcare coverage to tens of thousands of Californians. We've, worked in coalition with other groups to do Medicaid expansion, improve the minimum wage, and restrict predatory lending in places around the country. And we're proud of all that too. So I just want you to think of us not just as a labor union, but an organization that tries to speak to all people. And that's what hopefully we're doing this month to celebrate Black History Month. And just want to welcome everyone and appreciate your time and effort and attention to be here. So good to see you. I'm going to hand it back to you, Natasha, and I look forward to the program.
Thank you so much, President Dave Reagan. We appreciate you joining us tonight. And now I'm going to hand it over to Vice President and Afram Caucus member, Stan Lyles.
There you go. Thank you, my sister. And I'm so happy to be here this evening. A lot of people, talk about healthcare and what's important in healthcare. And so we at UHW like to make sure that we really fight to make sure that people have healthcare all over the country. And that's our main staple of UHW, to make sure that we deliver, increase the standard of living for working people and increase the healthcare for working people. I'm just excited to be here this evening because we've been putting this on for several years. And like Dave said, each year it gets better and better. And so I'm so impressed tonight to look around as I look around this Zoom meeting, I see so many good leaders around the UHW. Then we see leaders around the state, assemblymen and women, secretaries of state, and I'm just really impressed. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be a part of this Fireside chat, and I'm ready to get started. So thank you for putting this on, and thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. And I'm excited to get started. So back to you, Natasha.
Thank you again, Stan Lyles. And so now it is a great pleasure and an honor to introduce our Afram President, my sister, Georgette Bradford.
Thank you, Natasha. I just want to say welcome again to our guests that are speaking. I share the same sentiment with President Reagan and Vice President Lyles, how amazingly pleased we are to have Secretary of State Dr. Weber and the Assembly members with us. I look forward to this being a dynamic and full conversation. But I want to speak a little bit about AFRAM and who AFRAM is. And AFRAM is our African American caucus within SEIU UHW. And our goal is to see members of African American descent and from the diaspora ascend in the ranks of leadership, not only in our union, both locally and internationally, but also within our communities and within the government. And as we have gone through this past few years of this pandemic, we have seen certain systemic and institutionalized racist policies, procedures. Our country is founded on institutionalized racism. And a lot of those disparities were highlighted by COVID. And on top of that, we went through the uprising and people having their voice heard over the tragedy, which was the murder of George Floyd. So in that universe, in that reality, our members decided to say, what more can we do? What more can we do besides march? What more can we do besides make comments online? What more can we do besides be frustrated? And that's where we decided to do more in getting engaged with politics, ask our members to run for public office, ask our members to be delegates, interact with the California Legislative Black Caucus, help to lobby and support their bills and their priorities. So pleased to have the members of the caucus here along with the Secretary of State, because this not only is a continuation of that work that we have really focused on in the past 2 years, but the beginning of what we're going to do for 2022 in hearing what are the priorities from the caucus members and from the Secretary of State. So as Black labor, we can support and we can help move the agenda. And with that being said, I also want to acknowledge our AFRAM Executive Board members that are also on the call. And I wanted to start with our Vice President, Mr. Brew.
So good evening. My name is Debrew Carthen. I am a part of SEIU UHW. I am the Vice President, and I also sit on the Executive Committee for SEIU UHW. And I'm also an Assembly Delegate for Assembly District 21. I am so honored that you all are here with us this evening. We really appreciate you taking the time out to have this fireside chat with us. And we just want to welcome you, and feel free to be transparent because this is family. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debrew. And I would also like to recognize our amazing secretary, Terry.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Terry Ridgway-Olmos. I am the AFRAM Secretary. I'm also UHW staff, working as an education organizer. And just once again, thank you guys for being able to take the time to join us this evening. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Terry. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Natasha to get us started.
All right, so now here are a couple of quick ground rules. Once again, we definitely thank you for being here today. We fully support respectful engagement, and we want to see your reactions and chat responses. We will be monitoring the chat, and hopefully we will have time for a live question and answer session later. I want to direct your attention to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. The happy face icon with the plus mark on the top left of its head has plenty of options for reactions. Please use the reactions. And then more to the left, you will see a square icon titled chat. Please utilize the chat and reactions throughout today's program. Let's get started today. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by introducing our legislators and elected officials and members of the Congressional Legislative Black Caucus. There are 3 panelists, and after each introduction, we will ask one question to be answered by our panelists, and then move into 3 rounds of questions from the AFRAM members. So the first one, it gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce the first Black woman California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley N. Weber. Over the course of more than 20 years in public service, from the San Diego Board of Education to the Secretary of State's office, Dr. Shirley N. Weber has emerged as a powerful voice for voting rights and election reform in Sacramento. Her record of defending civil and voting rights makes her the Secretary of State California needs and deserves. Dr. Weber grew up in the Pueblo del Rio housing projects in South Los Angeles. Dr. Weber is a living testimony to the power of public education. She is a proud product of California Public Schools, district schools in Los Angeles through high school, and later at UCLA, where she earned 3 degrees, including her PhD at only 26 years old. As one of the few Black women in Southern California navigating academia in the late 1960s and 1970s, Dr. Weber ascended to become one of the youngest ever professors at San Diego State University, where she helped found the Africana Studies Department. In recognition of her dedication to public service and her fearless dedication to voting rights in California, Governor Newsom nominated Dr. Weber to be California's 30th Secretary of State on December 22nd, 2020. And she was confirmed by a bipartisan majority of both houses of the California legislature, and she is the first Black woman elected to the position. Welcome, Dr. Shirley Weber.
Well, thank you so very much. It's good to be with you and to be with all of the SEIU members. I'm glad that your AFRAM has a committee and is actively, hopefully, providing opportunities for the knowledge and the information that is so essential in terms of African-American history and those things that are essential to our lives. I'm always excited at Black History Month because, as one of the founders of Africana Studies locally in terms of San Diego, but also chairing and being in charge of the National Association of Black Studies, I always recognize the fact of the tremendous history that we don't know and the limited opportunities we have to basically study it. And so I encourage everyone to make Black history of 365 days and maybe take one off on leap year. An issue and a concern for all of us to work hard to achieve. I'm to give a brief introduction to myself, and I think you've gotten more information about me than probably most folks have. But my dad was a sharecropper, person from Hope, Arkansas, who came to California because his life was threatened, and we worked and lived in the projects, the Pueblos, and eventually moved over to 45th and Broadway, where I attended Manual Arts High School, and eventually went to UCLA. So I had the best, I think, of what people had to offer in terms of a strong community, a strong church, a family that believed in me. We didn't have any money because oftentimes people will equate having the best and having money, but you can't buy support, you can't buy love, you can't buy encouragement. And those were the things I had that propelled me forward and obviously became the foundation upon which I demand excellence for all of our children, because those are the things we can give them. We can give them support, we can give them knowledge, we can give them the help that they need, and we can instill pride and self-esteem in our children. We don't have to be millionaires and billionaires to do it. We can do that by what we do each and every day in our personal lives, as well as what we do in our organizations. I've spent 8 years in the California legislature, and during that time, we made some tremendous amount of strides in terms of legislation, basically having mandates for racial profiling, making sure that we change our policy concerning use of lethal force. You can't shoot a person in the back. You can't use your gun unless it's absolutely necessary to protect your life or the life of someone else. And of course, the reparations bill, that was extremely important, and it's still now. We should have a report coming forward in July to talk about how do we restore the damage that has been done. How do we basically restore African Americans after almost 400 years of degradation, limited resources, no land, no opportunity for growth and development for a significant number of us. And so demanding reparations in California is extremely important, because we will be the lesson for the nation that continues to struggle with the ability of just to pass the reparations bill in Congress for over 40 years. And so as a result, in less than a year, authored the reparations bill along with members of the assembly, and we got it passed, and the commission is formed, and we're moving forward in California. I know you asked what are my priorities. I'm going to be brief because I really want to have a chat with those of you. My priorities right now and remain the same. And one of the reasons why I took the position as Secretary of State when the governor approached me about it, because it was not on my radar for things to do. But I took it because I know that these are critical times, that everything we worked for the last 50 years in terms of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the efforts that we put into trying to change the narratives in this country, get African Americans and others elected to office, empower women, all those kinds of things is really in jeopardy right now. And people are trying to take us back to pre-1965, take us back where states can decide what they want to do and who they want to let vote, and the conditions under which they can vote. So this is a critical time, and it's really our time for a battle that our ancestors gave us. So number one priority for me is obviously securing the vote, not only in California and making sure that everyone who has a right to vote is registered and is voting, but also across the nation. California can support folks in Michigan, and can support those in Florida, and can support those in Arizona, and help to elect individuals into the office of Secretary of State that will hopefully protect all of our rights and all of our efforts at voting and secure our families. So number one issue for me, obviously, is voting rights. And we're across the state, basically, and across the nation, advocating for voting rights and making sure that education is critical. I continue to serve on a number of national boards and commissions, and I know that people being able to vote, they need the knowledge, they need the critical thinking skills, they need to be able to understand the politics of the day. And that's going to happen if we basically adequately educate our folks and make sure that they know who they are and can advocate on their own behalf. The last thing I say is a third thing that I think is a priority that people don't think about right now, is that we have our California's archives, and we are in the process now of making those archives look like California, putting more African American, more women, more Latinos into the archives to save the history, so that our children, when they go to the archives of California, can know that there are Black people in the archives who've made a difference, that there are in California. And I want to make sure that our archives is a clear reflection of that. And we're doing some things with the Green Book this month and some other kinds of things that really, really address the issue of what Black life was like in California, what Black life was like across the nation, and hopefully strengthen us. So at that point, I'm gonna conclude, because I want to be respectful of your time and my time, and make sure that we get to the questions. So once again, thank you so very much for having me with you this evening. I'm going to look forward to this chat, and any questions and concerns you have, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley Weber. And so in the essence of time, our next two panelists are members of the Congressional Legislative Black Caucus. And so we are definitely going to give a brief bio, and then we're going to ask them a question. So I'm going to turn it over to Georgette, and Georgette will ask a specific question of the next panelist.
Thank you, Natasha. I have the honor of introducing Assembly member who's actually over a district that's the neighbor to my district. And I have had a chance to see him in action at our Union Hall when we phone bank, and we've had other activities. So not only is he a member of the California Legislative Black Caucus, but he's also a healthcare champion as well. Assembly member Kevin McCarty. Kevin McCarty was elected to the California State Assembly in 2014 to represent the 7th Assembly District, which includes Sacramento, West Sacramento, and parts of unincorporated Sacramento County. McCarty serves as the chair of the Assembly Budget Subcommittee on Education Finance, which oversees the largest component of California's multi-billion-dollar budget. As chair, McCarty made historic investments in public education, including expanding access to preschool for low and middle income families, providing greater career technical education programs, and increasing student enrollment at our public colleges and universities. Other legislative priorities for Assemblymember McCarty include addressing housing affordability, fighting climate change, championing criminal justice reform, curbing gun violence, tackling the opioid crisis, and advocating for the middle class. So I say welcome and thank you so much for being here, Assemblyman McCarty. And I would like to pose the question to you. In this time of COVID, how has the work that you've done been impacted?
Wow. Well, first of all, it's great to see everybody here tonight and happy Black History Month. It's great to see my former colleague, Dr. Weber. She always inspires us, and we don't see her enough. And she was always our role model in the legislature and being the conscience of what is right and just for our public policy. So, you know, COVID, it's been a tough couple years. Just from a big perspective, I kind of feel like, you know, those athletes that play in the games where there's no fans in the stands. You know, we saw people in the Super Bowl this past weekend, but the last couple of years we haven't seen you all come for Lobby Day to talk about, you know, healthcare workers and you know, rights for employees. And one thing I would want to note is I really give a hats off to what Dave Reagan said earlier, that I love how SEIU and your members, UHW, fight for what's right for your healthcare workers, but also go outside of the lane sometimes and talk about issues like, you know, police reform. A couple of years ago, we had our big police reform package. One of the most powerful witnesses we had was our local SEIU leaders here stepping up to work with Dr. Weber and I and push our bill across the finish line. So thank you for that. But in this COVID lens here, you know, we've had certainly seeing that our public policies and the impact for COVID has disproportionately impacted poor in California, people of color, communities of color. We've seen that loud and clear. People who are doing very well in this economy, in the COVID economy, you know, are people with means, you know, people who are struggling, people who have gotten sick, people who have gotten COVID and died, and their family members, people who are having a tough time paying their bills and their rent, are disproportionately communities of color. So we've noticed that and try to make sure our response is accordingly. Also in this COVID last 2 years, which Dr. Weber noted too, which is interesting, in the summer of 2020, right after COVID hit, we also had the summer of George Floyd. And that allowed us to push forward bills that we've been trying to do for decades and never got the votes. You know, a big bill that I had that got on the ballot that I've been pushing for voting rights for formerly incarcerated. Never had the votes before that kind of racial justice awakening 2 summers ago. So whether it's, you know, ethnic studies or you know, the lethal force laws or the reparations bill, you know, quite a few things we were able to push forward, and we're still not done yet. And I think that the window is wide open for us to really kind of recalibrate about a justice lens here in California. And certainly during Black History Month is an opportunity to talk about those issues and push forward.
Georgette, you're on.
Thank you, Assemblyman McCarty. I'm looking forward to us delving deeper into that subject later in the evening. But next, I'm going to introduce our fellow Afram member who's going to bring the next speaker to us, Ms. Janice Wisdom.
Thank you, Georgette. I'm honored to be here tonight and for the opportunity to introduce our next panelist. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to Assemblyman Isaac Bryan. I'm equally excited he's here to talk to us about the interest and concerns of our organized labor union and the Black community, and to gather insights on the issues that are important to him. Isaac Bryan was elected in May of 2021 to represent California's 54th Assembly District. Prior to his election to the Assembly, Isaac served as the founding director of the UCLA Black Policy Project, a think tank dedicated to advancing racial equity through rigorous policy analysis. He served as the first director of public policy at the UCLA Ralph J. Bunche Center, as well as director of organizing for the nationally recognized $1 Million Hood Project, a community-based participatory research project. Isaac also chaired the successful Measure J campaign in Los Angeles County, a ballot measure that allocated hundreds of millions of dollars a year to address racial injustice and strengthen communities. Measure J sets aside money for investment in youth development, small business support, job training, alternatives to incarceration, affordable housing, community mental health, and substance abuse treatment, and other systems of care. Isaac is a community organizer, highly regarded policy expert, and a published academic. He authored the first holistic report for the City of Los Angeles on the needs of the formerly incarcerated Angelenos and exposed a gap in youth justice policy. Research that was ultimately used by then Senator Holly J. Mitchell to advance SB 4439. For years, his academic and organizing work has been at the intersection of environmental, economic, education, and housing justice. So welcome, Senator Assemblyman Isaac Brown. And my question for you is this: in the time of COVID, how has the work you do been impacted? And please share with us things that are important to you.
Absolutely. First of all, Ms. Wisdom, thank you for that. A good reminder that I need to shorten my bio, especially because when it's read after Dr. Weber's, it doesn't sound all that impressive. It's really good to be here with all of you. I first spoke with Afram, I don't know, 5 years ago in Long Beach. My auntie Michelle Reed brought me down to give a presentation on bail after Senator Bradford talked. Interestingly enough, I was also the first expert witness Dr. Weber had to testify on the reparations bill when it went through the Judiciary Committee before I was in office. Been fighting for us every way that I can in every position that I've been in, but this one as an elected official is new for me. It's new for us, and I'm really, really excited. We got one bill signed into law this last year. I got in June. I had a bill with my name on it 6 days later. We were ready to work. And it was AB 1043. It was signed by the governor. It creates a new section of in our housing code to uplift people who have acute poverty. That's people who live within 0 to 15% of an area's median income. In Los Angeles County, that's 180,000 households who make $17,000 a year or less. So when we're talking about homelessness, it's not just getting people off the streets, it's making sure our people don't fall into the streets. And it's that group that we've now elevated that are the quickest to fall into homelessness. So I'm proud to be 1 for 1 on legislation. I could leave now and be done. No, this year we've got a really big, a large bill package we're going to be introducing on Friday. I come to this work really looking at all of the ways that our community is let down, from health infrastructure, including not having access to quality health care and health infrastructure, to working in hospitals that are decrepit, literal health infrastructure. I'm looking at the child welfare system. I was adopted as a kid in a family that did foster care for 26 years. They adopted 9 of us. They were crazy, absolutely crazy. But they cared about us immensely. And so I got a number of pieces of foster care legislation. I'll give you a sneak preview to one. I don't know if you know this, but in California, if the county takes custody of your children, and then you do all that you have to do to regain custody and you get reunified, they send you a bill for the time your kids were in foster care. Yeah, I know, Miss Williams, that's what my eyes did too. I was like, nope, can't do that anymore. So we introduced that bill, and we plan on running that all year. We're planning on making sure that foster youth have housing when they come out of the system, because we know that 40% are likely to end up on the streets if we don't get them housing in that first year. I've got a really large bill looking at our brothers and sisters coming home from incarceration. 95% of the people who are incarcerated are coming home at some point. The average stay in the prison system is 5 years. The average stay in the county jail is 10 days, right? And so people need support. And so we're developing a housing and workforce development program. We're asking for $200 million. Again, if you want to solve homelessness, you got to stop people from falling into it. And people who come out of incarceration, who we just give a couple dollars and tell them don't spend it all in one place. And then we block you from getting employment. We block you from getting housing. We block you from participating in society fully, except you can vote now, thanks to Assemblymember McCarty, when you're on parole. We've got to make sure that people have housing and opportunities to better themselves. I also chair the elections committee. I'm one of the youngest members of the legislature ever elected, the youngest Black member of the legislature currently. I got elected when I was 29. And I chaired my first committee hearing before my 30th birthday. And I say that now because I'm 30 now. I turned 30 in January. But I'm the chair of the elections committee, which means I'm also Dr. Weber's counterpart in the assembly, which means we talk on the weekends about how we can protect voting rights, how we can reform the recall process and make it less confusing and less of a waste of time for taxpayers who deserve to have that $200 million we spent invested in other things when the governor won with, I don't know, 70% almost. There's just a lot we've got to do to make sure, particularly people that haven't historically had access to the polls, right? People whose voice hasn't been featured in policy making or in elected office, continue to maintain that right, especially when the federal government is moving so slow. We can't pass a voting rights bill named after John Lewis. What are we doing? That's bad trouble. We in trouble. But here in California, we're pushing a different direction, and largely because of our Secretary of State, in no small part due to my brother, Assemblymember McCarty. And I'm just grateful to be in a position to be fighting here in the 54th Assembly District.
Well,
And
thank
we are,
you.
yeah, go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead,
okay.
Denise.
Thank you, Assemblyman Bryan. I'm impressed with your work, and each of these issues are near and dear to my heart. And we're looking forward to hearing and seeing more of what you do more. I'm going to turn it back over to Natasha.
Absolutely. And now that we know who is in the house, we want to thank each and every one of our panelists. And now we're going to start the rounds of questions. We are going to ask that you only take 3 minutes to answer the questions. And some of the questions you've touched on in your introductions, but it'll be like a double part question. So I'm going to start again with Dr. Shirley Weber, and we'll go in the order of introductions to answer these questions. So it'll be Dr. Shirley Weber, and then Assemblymember McCarty, and then Assemblymember Bryan. Okay, so for the first question, what are some of your priorities as Secretary of State and as caucus members for 2022? And then how can labor, specifically Black labor, help support these priorities?
I hope you can, yeah, okay, fine. We were having some issues with muting. You know, I think the significant thing in terms of the Secretary of State, clearly education is always a major priority for mine, and I become extremely concerned because the achievement gap refuses to close and widens in certain places. And truly COVID has not helped at all with that in terms of our kids being left behind. So, you know, that has to be a critical issue for us. The other piece obviously is ensuring that that what we have accomplished in California is we've done some amazing things in terms of people's right to vote. We've opened up opportunities. We have everybody getting a ballot in the mail. We have vote centers. We have more than one way of accomplishing that. And so I'm hoping that those of us in the Black Caucus and those of us who are constitutional officers, that we will not only realize what we've accomplished, but get prepared to protect it. You know, sometimes we focus on the fact that we've accomplished something and we just get all excited and dancing in the street. And all while we up there getting happy about it, these folks are working to unravel it. And you're going to see, hopefully SEIU will see this and fight with us, that there are going to be efforts and things put on the ballot because they can't get it through the legislature. We don't have a crazy legislature that's going to make rules like they do in Georgia and Texas about people's right to vote. But there will be initiatives on the ballot that people are working on right now that will call themselves voting integrity, which means they want to limit your ability to vote. The fact that we have been able to register so many individuals, there are people now trying to increase incarceration with regards to the amount of when we reduce the the issue and saying, okay, if you only stole so much money, you know, you're not a felon, you can do this and that. They're trying to reintroduce that again. So there are initiatives that's coming across my desk every day to unravel all the things that we've accomplished in terms of social justice issues, efforts to limit who can vote again, because they're saying, look, you've got all these felons, these people on parole who are voting, look, and crime is increasing in their minds. And so as a result, we're going to see an onslaught of legislation that, initiatives, I guess, that are going to be on the ballot that would make an effort to unravel what we've done. And I keep telling people, you can't go to sleep on this stuff. These folks are working 24/7 to undo what we've done. We saw what they did with bail. When bail, we had worked for years to eliminate bail. And then all of a sudden bail ends up on the ballot and people went all kind of crazy with regards to it. And as a result, we lost bail after years and years of fighting. And poor people didn't realize that what they were doing, because they slapped a few Black faces on the TV. They had a few Black folks basically at a jail trying to get out and all this other kind of stuff, and confused people so much that we threw away our opportunity. And Assemblymember Bryan, who worked hard, he had folks at UCLA to tell us about how much bail was costing our communities every year, billions of dollars in bail, wealth going out of our community. And a matter of just a few $1 million thrown into a campaign, they eliminated bail. And so what I'm saying to you is that our priority has to be not only getting more stuff, but paying attention to what we got and fighting to keep it. Because folks they're not going to just lie down and say, oh my God, you know, Weber and her crew has let all these people vote that never voted before. They never even thought about voting reform. Because why? Because we showed up in 20 and 30% of our population. We did not vote. Now that we got the spirit and we realize that voting can change our world and do some things, their goal is to limit our vote, to limit our ability to vote in California. And I'm hoping that those of you who are working with us are going to pay attention, not only just to the big stuff that we see that's coming up, but the things in terms of the initiatives on the ballot, and be organized to fight against it, because those things will take us back to a time that we don't want to go. And where we're now finally closing prisons and trying to make some sense out of people's lives and giving them a second and third chance. There's a whole group of people who make their money on that, and they will basically be fighting. And some of them may be your union people. I want to emphasize that, because keep in mind, the prisons and the guards all have a union, and their job is to keep their people employed. And they've always been the ones fighting against us closing prisons, fighting against trying to create more opportunity for folks to come out of jail. So keep your eyes on it, because it is not as simple as it seems. And the victories that we won, somebody is trying to undo them. And we're going to be watching that. And hopefully our caucus will be watching it. But when we do, and when we identify the issues that are there, I am optimistic that SEIU and its army will be fighting along with us to educate our public about how to vote and what not to vote for, because it is critical that we don't go back. It is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. And so now Assemblymember McCarty, same question. What are some of the priorities as caucus member in 2022? And how can labor, specifically Black labor, help support these priorities?
Yeah, thank you. So we right now are just putting together our bills for 2022. The deadline to introduce is actually this Friday, so very, very timely. So you know, me and Isaac and our 10 members of the Black Caucus, we did have 11, so we had somebody who stepped down. But we'll get back to. Actually, we're going to go to 12 this year because we have a special election in Vallejo in a couple of weeks. So we're going to get to our high water point. But that brings to a good point: is that California, we know, is far less than 10% Black population. So when we look at the issues we put forward, we're trying to see what can we maximize to help Black California. And there are certain issues that we are unfortunately at the top of the list of, poverty, homelessness, incarceration, things that Isaac talked about. So, when I put together my list of bills, I'm looking at some of those things where it can make, the biggest difference in the lives of millions of Black Californians. And you're not all in the same area anymore. We're not all in LA or Oakland, and we don't have 50% Black districts. I mean, my district is far less than 10% Black. I think Isaac has one of the Blackest districts in California, and his is probably in the 20s, something like that. So we have to really build coalitions and work on these issues, and we still certainly have strong coalitions, a lot of these issues with the Latino community, but a lot of these issues are very, very focused on Black California. So we have certainly our work to do, and we're counting on our labor partners to help us. And as I said earlier, when we had this big fight a couple of years ago with the powerful police unions and law enforcement, you know, some of the most powerful voices that helped us were SEIU and the Faculty Association, others. And people would say, wow, why are they stepping up? This isn't about their money. It's not about their benefits and this and that. Well, no, it's about the communities that we live in. And so, you know, your voice is extremely powerful. So when we ask you to help on our non-labor bills, it's very, very effective. So what am I going to be doing? I'm going to be looking at some of the marquee things I focused on. Education is a key for me. I'm looking at expanding after school programs to make them universal. We know after school programs, you know, help working parents take care of their kids when they're at work, but we also know after school programs keep kids out of trouble and keep them in school. So, you know, we're trying to make them universal for all families, regardless of income in California. And that'll be a tremendous boon for our Black kids to help them succeed and stay and do well in school. College affordability is one of my top priorities. We don't have enough, you know, Black students in UC and CSU, but the ones that we do, you know, they're hurting with the cost of college and paying, you know, for books and housing and food and transportation. So we're looking to expand financial aid to cover these non-tuition costs to really have college in California debt-free. And that'll be a tremendous benefit to Black students. We also have these programs like Umoja, which help specifically Black students in their community colleges thrive. And so I'm working to expand funding for that. That's really going to help. But the thing that Isaac talked about earlier was so key is you look at criminal justice and, you know, it's not just incarceration, but once people get out, how do we help them get out? You know, we're dramatically reforming our prison population. As Dr. Weber said, we're shutting down state prisons and people are getting out of the system, but how do we keep them out? How do we keep them from not being a statistic? And so it comes with housing. You know, I worked a couple of years ago to ban the box on applications, but that's not enough. How do we make sure that people actually get jobs after they're released from the criminal justice system? So I'm working on a bill that's going to provide some funding for programs across California to help reentry with these individuals. We have programs like our California Conservation Corps that helps people who are trying to get their life started again. We have some artificial barriers, you know, that you couldn't be a parole or probationer and participate in those programs. So I wrote laws a couple of years ago to get rid of that. But we now have these, you have these caps. You can only be up to 25 years old. So I'm looking to expand the cap and prioritize formerly incarcerated. So, you know, I think that's one thing that, you know, if you're frankly, even a Republican, you know, a conservative person, you know, you want to make sure that people who are out stay out and don't, you know, be a statistic as far as recidivism. So I think it has to be our top priority. You know, crime is a big issue on the voters' minds right now. So we need to make sure that we support people in our community to do well. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember McCarty. And so Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, same thing. The question is, what are your priorities in 2022 as a caucus member? And how can labor, specifically Black labor, help support these priorities?
Yeah, no, I love when you say as a caucus member, because what I hear is being Black in a place that we're not supposed to be. What are you going to be able to do for us? Because that's what we need to be thinking of while we're here, right? And that's part of the reason I ran for office, is to think, how can I leverage the institutions that were not designed with us in mind, right? And some of the ones that were designed to be harmful against us, how can we transform those to improve the conditions of life in our community? That's my focus this year. That's going to be my focus every year. Specifically and legislatively, I want to move some resources to our community while we have a surplus. Make sure that some of our historic Black institutions have the funding that they need. I know Assemblymember McCarty and I are working to get longstanding funding to some of our Black academic institutions in the UC system and the CSU system to make sure that our students have places to go and to learn about Black history and Black creation outside of the month of February, right? I'm looking to establish an alternatives to incarceration commission for the state. We did one in Los Angeles County when we ended the construction of a new women's jail a few years ago. And in establishing that commission in LA County, it led to the creation of the Alternatives to Incarceration office in the county, inside the county CEO's office, an incredible report with recommendations on how we can have accountability for a lot of folks without continuing to grow our investment in human caging. And so I'd like to bring that to the state level so that we can continue to think about the role that the state has to play in making sure that we build out alternative crisis response models, stronger reentry models, and making sure people who need care don't end up in a cage. We spend $15 billion a year on our state prison infrastructure. We don't spend that much on making sure people have the things that they need. We don't spend that much on the UC system. So it's a commission that I hope to push through this year to have us think critically about that. I'm looking at our homeless situation and our brothers and sisters who are unhoused. I've been housing insecure before. I have 2 siblings who have been unhoused more of their adult life than they've been housed. And one of the things that I know is that if you lose your home, you live in your car. And if you lose your car, you live in a tent. And we are giving people who are unhoused parking tickets that we know they can't pay. And then we are spending more money trying to collect that money than we end up collecting. So we are wasting money trying to collect these fees from people who have nothing, who end up losing their vehicle and then ending up on the streets. So I'm introducing a bill that's going to forgive parking tickets for people who are unhoused up to a certain amount. It's sponsored by some of the largest homeless service agencies in Los Angeles County. There's a model for it. It's the criminalization of poverty, exactly like you just said. It's a major focus of mine. The child welfare system has a lot of problems in it as well. I gave you a sneak peek at another bill I'm working on, but there's also this thing called bypass. It's a set of conditions that the courts can bypass family reunification and just strip you of kind of your rights to your child. And one of those things currently is if you have been accused of a crime, not convicted, right? If you're pre-trial, and that's a ridiculous reason not to provide family reunification services to a family. I think if you're convicted, you still might need some services for your family, but you certainly don't need them when you are still legally innocent, right? And have the opportunity to in many cases, still be home. And if we had gotten bail right that first time, more people would be home pre-trial, but it's all interrelated. We criminalize poverty, and we strip you of your kids, and we strip you of your freedom before you've even been convicted, and we make it all conditional on what kind of resources and access you have. So that's a bill we're looking at doing. I'm introducing something called the Justice 40 Act. When President Biden signed the big infrastructure bill, he announced the Justice 40 initiative at the federal level, basically saying, hey, I think we should give 40% of all of this money to underserved communities who we have historically neglected. And Governor Newsom jumped up and said, yeah, buddy, I'm in. But he didn't codify it with an executive order, and he didn't give any kind of legislative framework to make sure that that happens. And so I want to jump in there and create a framework by which the state has to honor that commitment that was said verbally and make sure that that money gets to our communities. Don't just say it because it sounds good. Let's really make sure that those dollars get to the people who need them, because we know that it's the same communities that lack infrastructure, that have the lowest performing schools, that have the lowest access to quality food, that have the highest police presence, that live closest to environmental hazards, right? These are all connected. And so we've got to invest those resources where they're needed. We're also going to try to establish a victim services pilot innovatively in community-based models. Right now, victim services are done by the district attorney. And oftentimes they withhold those services if you're unwilling to testify or be a part of the prosecution, particularly if it's harm resulting from somebody that you knew, or in domestic violence cases. So we're withholding victim services from women because they won't testify in a domestic violence case. Like, we need to be all up in their business instead of just giving care. If you want to testify and be a part of that, you should. If you just need help, then just get help. And we shouldn't make it conditional. And so I don't want the district attorney running all of victim services. I want the community to do it. I want women in DV cases and all victims of violence to have safe places that don't feel like law enforcement pressure to get the help that you need. And so we're going to try to pilot it in 5 counties. They told me when I got here, if you want to do something radical and you really want to change the status quo, call it a pilot first. Show that it works, collect your data, and then scale that thing up. So that's one of those things that we're gonna try to pilot. We're doing a number of things in education. There's no accountability measures right now for teachers and administrators if hate occurs in a school environment and they don't do anything about it. So that's nooses, that's all kinds of things. And so we're gonna add an addition to the ed code for when we see acts of hate. It's a bill that the NAACP brought to my desk that I think makes practical sense. It's an easy technical change. I'm gonna be calling my brother Tony Thurman in the Department of Education to get on it with us. But overall, we're trying to be cautiously ambitious this year. They say it's an election year, so you can't go too crazy, but it's also my first year and I didn't come here to just sit back and watch things happen. And so we're pushing thoughtfully. And I know the Black Caucus, we're all in solidarity moving together. And so I'm grateful that, to the second part of your question, what can labor do? What can you do? What can Black labor do? This morning, I got a text from my district director. A plaque came from UHW saying, thank you for having our back, basically. And I saw that this morning, and I can't tell you what that did to my sense of well-being for the day and my sense of purpose, and knowing that the work that we put in is seen and heard, and that on the hard days when people are coming for you, for standing for what's right, you got friends who've got your back, who aren't gonna let you fall, because you're gonna fall on them and they're gonna prop you right back up. And so knowing that UHW, you all are those people for me, means a lot. And that's the biggest role you can play, is continue to stand tall, so that when we get pushed, in a direction, we know that you're back with us, pushing right back.
Thank you, Assembly Member Bryan. I say we got the right people in this call today. I am going to pose the second round of questions and to each of you, and we'll be going in the same order. We heard a little bit from Dr. Weber about staying woke, keeping our eyes open in regards to the attack on voting right here in California. But I would like to ask each of you, as we see voting rights under attack throughout the nation and at the federal level, how as Californians can we join that fight? And then also, can you speak to the importance of having more African Americans engaged in politics in California at each and every level? And we'll start with Dr. Weber again.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the my colleagues who are here on and know that as I've left the assembly that we're in good hands, because they are pushing the agenda completely. And I really appreciate that. Clearly, as we know, the Voting Rights Act is under attack and is not being reauthorized. And so as a result, we're vulnerable in terms of what we should be doing. One of the things that we're doing in Secretary of State's office that's important when I knew that this initiative was coming forward is that we are having town halls. We've had our second one, and these town halls are built upon the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We're having older folks who understand what it was like not have the protection of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and what it really means, because our folks are somewhat confused. They think that for years they thought that the Voting Rights Act was authorized for Black folks to be able to vote and that we would lose our right to vote, which is not at all what it's about. And so we're having these town halls. You're all invited to join. We have one coming up in LA, in Dominguez Hills, and we broadcast it live to hundreds of folks, as well as in classrooms, and to help people understand that. So it's extremely important that we are there. There are efforts across the nation. If you look and see, there's a group called the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. And DAS, they'll be in town tomorrow. I'm supposed to join them in Palo Alto, but they are fighting all these repressive laws across the nation. They're fighting these laws and we're helping in terms of helping to raise money for them, helping to make sure that we get the right people elected, because there are about 25 people who are now running for Secretary of State across the nation. And those 25 folks have all taken an oath that they believe the last election was stolen. They believe that these votes, these elections should be overturned. And so what happens is that you can imagine what it's like if we're in California and we're doing our thing, but across the nation, we've got these folks who are willing to intervene, to make differences in elections and overturn things. So we have to take a broader picture about it. And so I've been working with them, and there's a group of women who meet on Sunday night, Joteka and their group, who was instrumental in getting the senators in Georgia elected through a cadre of Black women. We need to form all of these groups that are there. We've got the various associations in California that are political. We need to be involved in those organizations because they are participating nationally in this whole movement concerning voting. And so I want to encourage people to definitely make sure that you find some associations. If you can't, that you contact our office and let us know. It is important that we have Black folks in positions. We talk about the fact that representation does matter. It makes a difference when you have a cadre of Black folks in positions who are willing to fight the battle for you. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not believe in the election of all Black people to office because we have seen some Black folks who work against us. Ward Connerly got rid of affirmative action, and we're still paying the price for that years later. And so we have some folks, so I tell people, yes, we need Black folks, we need the right Black folks who will use their personal experience, their passion, and their knowledge of our community to be able to author good legislation that really appeals to the challenges we face. And that is important, that is critical, so that we're fortunate that we have folks in our Black caucus who are all focused and working together. And that's important because there will be those, because as soon as if there's any crack in the wall, and there's anyone who's opposed to the progressive agenda that we have, rest assured that person will become the spokesperson against the bill. They will become the darling of the media, and they will begin to carry a message that's not our message. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are looking carefully at finding folks who look like us, who understand, who listen, and who are willing to fight for us, because a representation does matter. And I tell you that to people all the time, it does matter. I often have Black folks say, we're not making a difference who get elected, ain't nobody gonna do nothing. That's the attitude we sometimes come up with. And when I have people in my community who say that, I said, so which means, I come right back up and say, so that means I don't matter, is that correct? Oh no, not you, Dr. Weber, because you take care of business. I said, yes, and so do a whole bunch of other people. Find some more of those people who take care of business and elect them to office. And those of us who are here as elected officials have demonstrated that you can be an elected official, you can be aggressive, you can be excellent in the job that you do, and still, and not find yourself without power, without influence. And that's extremely important that we understand that people do respect those who adequately advocate for their community, who basically know how to legislate and can get the job done. And that's extremely important. So you don't have to worry about, am I going to be ostracized? Are people going to look at me kind of strange and I'm not going to be able to accomplish things? I tell people, there was probably nobody in the assembly more hated than I was by the police, especially for every bill that I ever put forward. And as a result, it shocked people that the governor would make me Secretary of State. I mean, it's that kind of situation. But if you're a person of integrity, you fight the good fight. You're not doing it out of maliciousness or viciousness, but you're doing it out of love for your community and for the state of California. You will get whatever recognition you think you deserve. You will get that recognition. So I think it is extremely important we find folks who understand us, who are willing to fight the good fight, who listen, and who can deliver for us. And then we need to elect them into office, and we consistently support them through the difficult times, because if you don't, then what will happen is that people will then realize that, hey, if I fight this battle, I will never get anything. I will not happen, things, those kinds of nature. When I was on the school board, I had a principal who fought for Gompers Middle School with all the discrimination occurring, and she was fighting for every kid in that school. And she was fighting, and every time you turn around, the media would have some negative, somebody else. And everybody thought at some point, well, you can remove her from that school because then you won't have so many problems. I said, no, I told them, I said, I assured her that if you fight for our children, they'd have to get me first because I'm gonna stand in front of you. I am not gonna let them take you down. And no matter what happened, I fought to keep this sister there if I had to prop her up because she was a good sister. And I knew that if they took her out, then there would never be another Black person who would stand up against the system on behalf of our children. And that's why it's so important when you see things, even if you hear something small that sounds weird, you better protect those folks who are fighting for you. Because if the word gets out, okay, you fight these battles, but then in the end, they leave you on something small and insignificant, then it's at that point, you're not going to find anybody, unless they're crazy, wanting to basically fight for you because you don't help and fight for them. And so I say to everybody, we got to fight this fight, but at the same time, we got to make sure that we are supportive of them, that we have chosen the right people to carry our message, and that we are willing to stand with them and to help them to be successful. Because when that happens, then everybody knows, don't mess with this person because they got forces behind them and they're going to advocate, and their community is going to recognize and celebrate them for their advocacy. And that's extremely important as we engage in this battle, that you know what your role is to be, to select the right people, put the issues out there, fight alongside of them. And then when things get crazy, you're still there to support them. You're still basically making sure that they can still move forward as a legislator and get things done. And that is critical. That is critically important that you're there for them because they will be there for you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber, for that call to action. And next, we're going to go to Assembly Member McCarty. Same question. How can we, as Californians and labor in California, get behind the fight at the federal level and to protect the voting rights across the nation that are being attacked, and also the importance of African Americans being at every level of government and politics here in the state?
Well, thank you. Let's start right here in California. So first of all, it's the barriers for voting in California are very limited. If the rest of the nation had a third of what we do here in California, we'd be in great shape. But they're trying to turn back the clock to 1950 or even worse across the nation. So, but here in California, we know that pretty much everybody is now registered to vote. Doesn't mean they're gonna vote. So a few years ago, we worked on a bill, and I was proud. It was one of my bills that I worked on that has automatic voter registration. So now it's automatic when you get your driver's license or a state ID card, you're a voter. So, but we need to make sure that we talk about voter education, what's on the ballot, what these measures are. We have an opportunity to elect 3 or 4 more Black caucus members throughout California in non-Black seats. So we'll keep you engaged about that. So there is opportunity here in California. But I think it's important to talk about, the principles of voting and what's happening across the nation, as Dr. Weber noted. And I'll be honest with you, I'm terrified when I read what some of these states are proposing to do. That, getting rid of, individuals, basically, obligations to affirm the electoral college votes. And, they can decide if they thought that their elections were, not how they like to see them, and change the results. They want to change the rules about, voter IDs, which we know disproportionately impacts, poor people and minorities, and certainly in some of these battleground states like the South, Black voters. And so we want to eliminate what we've done here in California, which is absentee voting. And what's the funniest thing? They don't like absentee voting. I did absentee voting for decades. It worked really well. A bunch of rich white people and older people. So that they did it very, very well. As soon as Democrats and communities of states, diverse states, started learning about absentee voting, they stopped, valuing absentee voting. So, I think, we are a big voice. We can speak up. Certainly we know people in other states, but whatever you can do to help and support, and I know SEIU is very, very engaged as far as taking a look at this across the nation. So whether it's going up to Nevada to work on some of these issues or doing phone banks in other states, there'll be plenty of opportunity for political engagement. But California, I think, needs to lead the way. We need to continue to make sure that we eliminate barriers to vote. We've done so. And I know Dr. Weber is on the case to make sure that we close any more little things that we're trying to address. So like everyone else always says, this next election is the most important. They're always the most important. So I don't need to tell you, that's why you're here tonight, because you're engaged with your union. And so let me just state that without your effort and hustle and work in the communities on the streets, we wouldn't have what we have. So thank you, and just keep it up.
Thank you, Assemblymember McCarty. And Assemblymember Bryan, same question to you. So how can we join the fight to protect voter rights across the nation, and the importance of African Americans being at every level of government?
Well, you're doing step 1 already, which is recognizing it is a fight, right? Power concedes nothing without a struggle. And Fannie Lou Hamer and so many others struggled hard for us. Dr. Weber struggles hard for us currently to make sure that everybody has the right to vote, has their vote counted. We did vote by mail last year, where everybody gets a ballot. That is something that we're going to sustain. People have tried to push back at it already, and that's too bad, because I'm the elections chair. We're going to make sure that everyone continues to get their ballot. But there are still some people who have been disenfranchised. There are some states that allow people to vote while they're incarcerated. It's not something that I'm going to touch this year, but it's not lost on me that the people who are incarcerated are disproportionately Black, brown, poor, and indigenous, and often there due to a constellation of other systemic failures that landed them into activities that we then criminalized. And then we stole your right to participate in democracy. That's a very interesting dynamic. Thankfully, we restored it for when you're on parole. Again, shout out to Kevin McCarty and many others, Initiate Justice, who fought for that just a couple of years ago on the ballot. But up until then, even being on parole, you couldn't vote. And so we've got to make sure that we re-enfranchise a lot of people. But we're also in a posture right now of just preventing new attacks on democracy in California. There are dozens and dozens of restrictive bills that have been introduced all across the country to limit the ability of folks to vote, to set up new versions of literacy tests and poll taxes and other kinds of barriers that we've seen before, new versions of those, new forms of those. And here in California, we have colleagues who would very much like to echo that, who undermine the credibility of democracy with phrases like the election was stolen. We've got to fight that kind of a misinformation campaign. And so we're on top of it in the Black Caucus. We're on top of it, all three of us on this call and several others. And so you can sleep easy knowing that you're in a state with the kind of leadership that can hold ground. But the importance of that leadership, to the second part of the question, is we've got to have people in the right positions. We've also got to know representation doesn't always mean you represent it. And we got to have folks who are here for the long haul and are ready to do the job they signed up to do. We've seen a mass exodus in the legislature this year. I've got colleagues of multiple different places across the state who up and quit on their constituents, didn't even finish their term out. We've got to make sure the people that we put into office are people that are going to fight until you're not allowed to fight anymore, and then double check to make sure that you're not allowed to fight anymore because they still got some in them, right? That's who we need in office. And we've got a number of candidates around the state. The Black Caucus has endorsed a handful of candidates. We're trying to get our numbers up. Like Kevin said, we have the potential to get up to 12 because it's also making sure that there's a thing happening right now. We're being displaced and pushed out of our own neighborhoods or historically neighborhoods that were ours. It was interesting watching the Super Bowl in Inglewood in the conflict between the Rams, which go Rams. And I'm so proud of Los Angeles, but also that stadium is the most expensive stadium anywhere in the world. And a lot of the rent prices, if you live anywhere near it, went up. And the rent protections in Inglewood are set to sunset, and so they're going to go up again. And that's us. And when you can't afford to live where you've always lived, you get pushed out to Lancaster and Palmdale, Moreno Valley, Victorville, right? The new Black strongholds, 25%. LA is 8% Black, Moval's 25. It's something we've got to be mindful of and make sure that we have representation politically in those places as well. It doesn't mean concede the neighborhoods that have always been ours, but it does mean be cognizant of the fact that there's entire groups of Black folks across the state who don't have representation, despite being a mighty political force in an area. We've got to get the right people in office, and it's not just in the state legislature, it's local elections too. School board members, city council members, it's union presidents, it's every election you can think of that involves people coming together to make a vote. We've got to make sure we have our champions. And I know that you all do that. You're doing it tonight by holding us accountable. But that's the importance of Black representation, because without us, we're in trouble. They say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Well, there can't be anything about us without us. And so we belong at the table. In many cases, we built the table. It's our table. So let's just keep on fighting.
Thank you, Assemblyman Bryan. Everything that you said is definitely getting us excited, motivated. I heard you say or talk about accountability for teachers, issues of hate in our school environment, and working with Tony Thurman in the Department of Ed and the NAACP. I heard Assemblyman McCarty mention voter education, which affects our children in higher ed and those who are incarcerated, and that we in California are the leaders, in terms of change, and that we've got to continue to fight the fight for our unions, our school boards, et cetera, in representation. So as a member of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, a proud parent and an advocate for education, I would like to pose our final question. And I would like you guys to answer it in the order of course, as you were introduced. And that question is, will the caucus be addressing the achievement gap for Black students in the state of California as part of our priorities in the 2022 year, as well as the need for more resources and support to close the education gap? Dr. Weber, we'll begin with you.
I'm glad you asked that question, and I think it's probably a very critical question that has to be asked and has to be answered. I'm not sure what the caucus itself is going to do. I'm hoping that they will address it. We've had it on our agenda. It's one of our pillars of concern. Cracking the educational gap in California is probably the most difficult and most persistent activity one can engage in. And most of you know, for the last 8 years as an assembly member, that was one of my challenges, even in getting money and resources, $300 million to kids at one point, to try to close the achievement gap, working with this whole issue of how schools are funded, not being able to get what I consider critical, which is accountability for performance into our schools. It is a critical issue that every person on this call should be greatly concerned about. It is a difficult issue, and because it affects so many different elements of California's life. And yet it is essential that we solve this issue. California has the largest and the most diverse university system in the world. We have the best of everything. The University of California is unrivaled in terms of its ability for research and grants and those kinds of things. Our Cal State University is amazing. It has 500,000 young people in our universities. And our community colleges are ways in which those who fall between the gaps or who are returning to school have the ability to basically reorganize their lives and move forward. And yet we believe in our actions and our practices that we are incapable of cracking the issue of K-12. And I say that even though people will say, no, I say it because I have the scars to prove it. I have the years of struggle to make it happen. I'm not sure. I was looking at a movie the other day, and I think I forgot what it was called, but in the end, the guy said, "You can't handle the truth." And I believe that is so true, that when we talk about education, most of the time we can't handle the truth, because the truth gets to the core of the very essence of the state and what it should be about. California should not have such a tremendous achievement gap. We should not be at the bottom, whether it's funding, but most importantly, where it's achievement. I served on the National Commission of Education for the Commission of the States. And of all the states that came in, Alabama, Kentucky, all of them had a major initiative in their state to change the educational system. Massachusetts, all those places had a focus, an executive focus on education, and made some difficult issues of training teachers and tenuring teachers and evaluation and assessment and on those critical issues that make schools successful. And yet we have yet to do that. Ron Edmonds says, we know everything there is to educate our children. He said, what we lack is the will. And that is so true. There's no institution more informed than the University of California. Every conference I've ever gone to across the nation, I discover when I get there that there's somebody from the University of California there who's the authority on something. There's somebody who's a researcher in our department of who worked down the street from me here in Sacramento, are the authorities on suspensions and expulsions, and yet we still had suspensions and expulsions in California. So what I'm saying is that it is a critical issue. It is a difficult issue, and many of us will patch it up with patches here and there. But probably those of you sitting here, if I ask how many of you are really, really happy with what's happening for your child in K-12, if I ask that question, many of you will say, I like my teacher, but this wasn't right, or that wasn't right. And it's difficult. And my heart every day bleeds for the children of California. It really, really does. And I continue to work on that issue with those who are advocates, and I have the scars for doing it, but I'm going to continue to do it because someone has to stand up for our kids. And being a kid raised in the Pueblos of Los Angeles, I had teachers from Mississippi and Alabama who were recruited to come to California to teach, and they were no joke. They made all of us, those kids in the projects who were poor, they didn't look at our family structure, they didn't look at how much money we had or didn't have. They just made sure that we performed and outperformed because they told us that we would have to. And we're still struggling in this state to basically ensure the education of every child in California. It is critical. And it's something that the caucus has to address, but it's something that those of you who are African-American on this call have to address in everything that you do, that we have to make sure that our kids are performing at the highest level and that they have a future.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Assemblyman McCarthy, again, the question is, will the caucus be addressing the achievement gap for Black students and, as a part of their priorities for 2022? And the second part, the need for resources and support to close that education gap. What are you proposing and what are you doing?
Yeah, so first of all, absolutely, it needs to be a priority, not just of the Black Caucus, but of the California legislature and of California as well, as so go Black kids. And, a lot of other issues are at stake. We look at the school to prison pipeline, the suspension rate, all those things relate to it's not the achievement gap, it's the opportunity gap. And too often that, kids start kindergarten, we used to everyone starts at the starting point of a race. But, Black kids start, 18 months behind many times in their preparation to enter kindergarten. So we need to think about other things like that early education. Last year we had an amazing state budget, a transformational budget, once in a generational year to do things like universal pre-K, which, I've been fighting for every year for 8 years, and now it's a reality, but we need to make sure that it works and that families know about it. So that's one thing that we're doing this year is not just new laws, but implementing what we had done last year. So if all Black kids had a year of childcare when they're 3 and a year of pre-K when they're 4, then start kindergarten, all the research shows that's the most important difference maker you can make to have a young kid be on the path to success in school, staying out of the criminal justice system and have, success in a career. But we have so much work to do. I know a couple of years ago, Dr. Weber led our caucus to reform the funding and how we look at the funding for our schools and look at the, the schools with high Black populations. To make sure that we focus on student success. And we're getting a little bit more resources out. And, I'm not sure if you've seen the study on that, the impact, Dr. Weber, in the last year and a half, but I'm not sure if it was a panacea, but most importantly, we need to keep fighting on this issue year after year. And so, yeah, we'll be out there. I have a couple of bills on early education. I have a bill that I know Isaac's talked about in our foster youth system to make sure they have adequate representation in their suspension and expulsion hearings to make sure they're not, kicked out of the school system, but have a chance to still continue with their education. So, it's a continual issue. We can certainly use the help of SEIU, UHW, or healthcare workers, but, our labor community as well, pushing the envelope on this. So thank you for the question.
Thank you for answering that, Assemblymember Kevin McCarty. We definitely want to give Assemblymember Isaac Bryan a chance to answer that question, and we are running out of time. So, but definitely the floor is yours.
Okay. I'll be real quick with it. Absolutely. Addressing the education gap is critically important. I went to 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school that I failed out of. My mama would have held me back, but I was already 5'11" in the 7th grade. And she was concerned of having a giant kid walking around 8th grade twice. Went on to high school, went to 3 high schools. I know California's education system well, and there's a lot of opportunity. But as was mentioned earlier, there's a gap in that opportunity. And we've got to do all we can to make sure that our per pupil spending is up to par, and that every kid has the right resources to get where they need to be. I was one of those who I had to go to college outside of California because I didn't make the A through G requirements. And I didn't make the A through G requirements because my counselors didn't prepare me for the A through G requirements. And I don't want to put it all on them. There was some personal accountability that had to happen too. But the pipeline for me to go into the university setting wasn't as straight as it is for some other students. And that's what's happening for a lot of Black students. We're disproportionately suspended, we're disproportionately expelled, and we're disproportionately arrested on our school campuses. Before I was in the legislature, I led a push in Los Angeles. Did you know the 4th largest, the largest school police force in the country, but one of the largest police forces in all of LA County is the Los Angeles Unified School Police Force. And 1 in 4 of their arrests over a period of time that we studied at UCLA was a child who was 12 years old or younger. Disproportionately girls, Black girls. The number one thing they were charged with, public disturbance, which I don't know what that means for kids. Because when I was a kid, I for sure was a public disturbance, but that doesn't mean you belong in handcuffs. And that stigmatizes the school setting. And what I realized was that LAUSD was spending $75 million a year on that police force. And so me and a bunch of my friends, we organized and we demanded the school board take some of those resources and invest them directly into Black student achievement. So we took $25 million out of that budget, which isn't nearly enough for our students, but it was 33% of the same budget that used to police and arrest them. We took that money and we invested it in opportunity and well-being, and we pushed the cops off of campus. All right, if we need you, we'll call you. but I don't need to see you on my way to class because that's stigmatizing for a lot of kids, disproportionately Black kids. And so that's always been a focus of mine, both personally and professionally. And here in the legislature, I'm going to lean on some of the elders who have trailblazed before me, like Dr. Weber, in getting the resources we need. And like Assemblymember Kevin McCarty, who chairs the subcommittee on education for the Assembly. That's a big deal, y'all. We got a heavy hitter on this call. And so I'm going to take my notes. I'm going to listen a little bit more than I talk in the space. That way, when I do talk, it's about that action and we move the needle a little bit. Thank y'all for having me tonight. Thank you for having all of us. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I could not thank you enough from the bottom of our hearts. SEIU UHW thanks you. I apologize that we did run out of time for the open floor question and answers. We didn't notice any specific questions in the chat, but we all together do want to give these 3 panelists at least 1 minute to give their closing remarks. In the same order, Dr. Shirley, Assemblymember McCarty, and Assemblymember Bryan. 1 minute each, please.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for celebrating Black History Month and obviously for inviting us to be here. I appreciate always being with my colleagues. I don't get a chance to see them very often, even though our offices are just across the street from each other, but they're busy and they've got an agenda that is very, very progressive. Let me just simply say to you that I appreciate the fact that you have an interest in working with the caucus, working with those of us who are in elected positions, to make a difference for African Americans, that wherever we are, we realize that we have the unique responsibility of not just serving on the jobs that we have and making sure everyone's okay, but raising our voice on behalf of a community that we know what that community does. And so we have an extra burden, an extra challenge, and an extra opportunity to really change the narrative in California concerning African Americans, whether it's in the schools, whether it's reparations, whether it's economic development, whether it's health. Let's utilize our caucus members, those who are elected, who understand the challenge, and let's support them in making the difference that will change not only our lives, but the lives of our children. That's what it's really all about. Be sure to study your Black history, because when you study your Black history, it makes you strong, and you'll never ever forget from whence you've come. So thank you so very much for having me with you this evening. And you guys have a great evening.
Assemblymember Kevin McCarty.
Yeah, thank you once again for having us here tonight. It is all, first it's inspirational to hear from our Dr. Weber. I miss her presiding over our Black History Month and just, getting up there and speaking the truth to power and talking about what's so important for California. So it's a pleasure that you all get to hear from her tonight. And I do miss her. And I enjoy tonight just talking about our priorities here in California. And, we do have the shortest month of the year, February, Black History Month, but it's certainly our time to shine. And I'm optimistic that the issues that we are pushing are breaking through. And I'll note that I'll just give you a couple years ago when we had this bill to reform affirmative action. We didn't get it past the ballot, but Dr. Weber led the cause, and we put on the ballot. We had the measure that I had on voting rights. I had police reform issues. We had reparations and ethnic studies. And a lot of these issues, we had a tough time getting, 41 votes in the legislature to get passed. And, you may, shrug your shoulders and say, what? How's that happen? It's the truth. And, in the last couple of years, I said this earlier, and it's sometimes, I call it the summer of George Floyd in the Capitol, because after that happened that May, I've never seen, the policy window open wide open. And so it's time for us to keep shining. As Isaac said, we didn't come here to sit on the bench. We come here to take out, our bat and get swinging for the singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. So this is our chance to really push the envelope and look at this racial justice and equity lens here in California. And, certainly Black history is a time to reflect on that and look at our common agenda. So thank you all for allowing me to participate tonight, and hopefully we'll see you all soon, especially my local people here in Sacramento. Hi, Denise.
And I'll be really quick with the final minute, so y'all can go back to your kids' dinner, whatever it is you need to do. Black people are the bedrock of this country, along with indigenous folks. And when you improve the conditions of life for Black people, you improve the conditions of life for all people. The same way you improve the conditions of life for Black workers, you improve the conditions of life for all workers, right? We know that. And I know a lot of you, you go to work every day, and sometimes you feel like you never can fully get ahead of the problem you've been tasked with addressing. But you still keep that hope and you keep on pushing. And to some degree, that's what it's like being a Black legislature. I think that's what it's like being Black in this country, quite frankly. We wake up and it always feels like we're never where we deserve to be and where we should be. And then there's just something about us that we just keep pushing. And it's that keep pushing that gives me hope every single morning. And you all have given me some hope today. You're on the front lines, and I'm grateful for everything that you do. And I'm grateful that you've given us an opportunity to share with you, to build with you, because when we move in solidarity, we win. When we fight, we win. And February 14th isn't just Black History Month. It's our annual organizing month to get it right and get it tight, so that the next 11 months we can endure and persevere and win some. And so I'm here this cycle, looking to get some wins for us. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you all again soon and sharing in those victories.
Thank you so much. On behalf of all three co-hosts, we want to thank you for joining us. We're going to turn it over to President Georgette Bradford for closing remarks.
Thank you, Natasha. I want to thank again, Dr. Weber, Assemblymember McCarty, Assemblymember Bryan for being with us. As I mentioned before, this isn't a one-off. This is the beginning of our journey into 2022 as UHW and as the African American Caucus of UHW. You have given us our call to action, our marching orders, and we hope to see you again throughout the year to continue this dialogue. So thank you so much for joining us. I do want to highlight the next few events that we're having. This is just the halfway point for our Black History Month celebration. Our next event is called I Don't Look Like What I've Been Through, Understanding and Navigating Trauma in the Black Community, run by Dr. Joy Madison. Next, we will have that's the 17th from 6 p.m. to 7:30. On the 18th from 6 to 7:30, Building Toward Black Financial Excellence. Also will be virtual with Lester and Kristen Barron. And on the 20th, Sunday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., we actually have an in-person event in the Sacramento area. It's the Bigger Than Africa movie screening with the director there for a post-screening discussion. It is an in-person event, so we will require either proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test in the past 48 hours. But we would love to see you there in person at the Movie Studio Grill in Rockland this Sunday from 3 to 6 p.m., starting off with a red carpet reception. We encourage everyone to dress up in red carpet attire and or African attire. So thank you again for joining us this evening, and hope to see you at the rest of our Black History Month events as we go through the month. Happy Black History Month, everyone. And I want to give one quick shout out to the phenomenal work from our political department. Without them, we could not have had this wonderful event. Suzanne Jimenez, Sean Fleming, Denise, I'm going to say your name wrong, Denise Tugade. And if I missed anyone, I apologize, but our political department is amazing, phenomenal. We have the best in the game. So I want to give a shout out to them and thank them very much.
We also want to thank our producer, Nguyen Weeks, and our host for tonight. Thank you very much. Couldn't have done all the backstage stuff without you. We appreciate you. And let's give it up for Georgette, Janice, and myself, Natasha.
Good night, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.